This is the initial overview test for the A-level course, Gaining and Losing an Empire 1763 to 1914. The content of this test will be based upon the overview lessons and work that you did preparing for this A-level, as well as wider reading that you would have been expected to have undertaken in readiness for the course. First question then, the Treaty of what was signed in 1763? In America, the 7 Years' War was known as what? Which three financial innovations were central to Britain's economic and imperial growth? Which company had exclusive monopoly rights to operate and trade in India? When did the Americans sign the Declaration of Independence? What was the date of the French Revolution? When was the Peace of Amiens? The Battle of what was fought in 1805? Other than London, which two British ports were at the centre of the British slave trade? Slavery was abolished in Britain in which year? The Battle of Waterloo was fought in which year? When was the Suez Canal acquired by the British? That concludes the test questions. It will be marked out of 15. So, the answers. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1763, and this brought the 7 Years' War to a conclusion, with terms very advantageous to the British. In America, however, the 7 Years' War was known as the French and Indian War, which is reflecting to some extent America's isolation from the global conflict that the 7 Years' War was. Their take on it was much more localised. The three financial innovations central to Britain's economic growth were the development of the stock market, the stock exchange, allowing risking companies to be shared amongst investors. Secondly, the insurance industry, which underwrote some of the risk attached to some of the adventures and exploits associated with the merchants and the traders. And finally, the Bank of England, which took over the management of Britain's national debt that had been acquired because of numerous wars and secured Britain a very favourable set of terms for borrowing, which enabled Britain in turn to outspend considerably bigger countries by population, like France and Spain. The East India Company was the monopoly company given a right by the British government to trade exclusively between Britain and India, shorthand as the EIC, and it established its main base of operations in Bengal. The Americans signed their Declaration of Independence in 1776. This wasn't the end of the War of Independence, but nonetheless it marks the point where the break between Britain and America was irrevocable. The date of the French Revolution was 1789. This in turn would lead to the French Republic, the Terror, and the rise of Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars, which would carry on until 1815. The Peace of Amiens was a temporary cessation of hostilities between the British and Napoleonic France in 1802. The Battle of Trafalgar was fought in 1805 between the British and the combined navies of France and Spain. Admiral Nelson commanded the British fleet and died in this action. Slavery was abolished in Britain in 1807, though this isn't to be confused with the abolition of slavery within the British Empire. The Battle of Waterloo, which concluded the Napoleonic Wars, was fought in 1815, when the combined forces of Britain and Prussia defeated Napoleon. And finally, the Suez Canal was acquired by the British in 1875, some years after its construction, but the ownership of the canal allowed Britain to control the short route to India via the Mediterranean, shortening the route to India around the Cape by a considerable amount of time.